In this video, I'm going to recommend the best value gaming GPU at every price point in the current market, and I'm going to actually recommend the RTX 5050 right now as the budget value $200 GPU on the new market because it's dropped to $210 on Amazon right now, at least this particular model. Now, I trashed this GPU in my launch review when I looked at it against the 9060 XT 8GB, which was at that time about $270, and the 5050 was about $250, which was its MSRP. I had the 9060 XT winning in basically every test, and by averaging about 40% faster in my testing. However, the current market looks very different. The 9060 XT 8GB is close to $290, whereas I found this RTX 5050 at $210. That completely changes the equation, although it does mean they're offering similar performance per dollar because you're spending about 37% more money to get the 9060 XT 8GB for about 40% more performance. So in other words, if you have about $300, the 9060 XT 8GB is actually also good value performance per dollar wise, and might make sense again, but only 8GB of VRAM for $300, that's a little harder to stomach than only 8GB of VRAM but only $210. So that is why at the around $200 mark, I am giving my recommendation to the RTX 5050 right now, but only as long as it's available at this price point. Now, honestly, today's video is focusing on the new market where there's just not a lot else to look at this price point. But if you want truly the best deals, you should really check out Jawa.gg. Huge thank you for them sponsoring today's video. You can list your own stuff for sale. You can buy, you can sell. And there's some great holiday deals. Also, not just individual parts, you can get entire gaming PCs. Use their PC Finder to get exactly what you're looking for. You can look at performance in specific games at specific resolutions. You can get specific parts that you're looking for. You can shop by theme to make sure it's going to match your room. Again, you can get individual parts. There's great deals all the time. And you can fund your upgrade by clicking the Get an Instant Offer button to sell your CPU or GPU directly to Jawa. And that will be, maximum convenience. Now, if you want to set your own price, you could become a seller on Jawa. You could even turn into a side business. There's tons of great reviews, and I can even get you $10 off your first purchase using code Owen10. So check them out. Huge thank you for them sponsoring today's video. If you're looking at the used market, there are better deals. Really do check them out. But if we get back to focusing on the new market, I will say that if you do have the ability to step up your budget, the 5060 Ti 16GB right now is actually available at a good price. At $369.99, it is directly competing at exactly the same price as the least expensive 9060 XT 16GB that I can find, which is also $369.99 at Amazon. I'm finding the 5060 Ti 16GB here at Walmart. Now, these cost exactly the same, and they both have 16GB of VRAM. Please pay attention that I'm recommending these 16GB options. If you've been out of the loop here for a while, there's 8GB versions of both of these cards. Don't pay this price for them. At 16GB, the latest games can run at maximum settings, whereas the 8GB cards do struggle on those max settings. Yeah, you can turn stuff down, but you're spending $370. You probably want to be able to turn up the settings in your games. And the 5060 Ti 16GB and 9060 XT 16GB both perform extremely well in the latest games at 1080p and 1440p. I've tested out a bunch of stuff in my review here. Like this is tons of testing, and you can follow up on that if you want to see anything in particular. In general, I had the 5060 Ti 16GB averaging 8% faster though, although both cards get wins and losses depending on what game and what settings you're testing. But the 5060 Ti offering slightly more performance on average and offering the same amount of VRAM, and also having the NVIDIA feature set, which does generally mean you get DLSS 4 in more games than currently have FSR 4. Their frame generation has a multi-frame gen feature. Whether or not you care about that, I don't know, but it's something they have. And again, in general, NVIDIA is kind of leading on the feature sets AMD trails, so being part of that ecosystem has some value to it. And so in other words, these are basically the equivalent product from each brand, and they're priced the same, so I would go with the NVIDIA version at this price. So I would say that this is the mainstream recommendation for most people looking to buy a GPU that you'll be happy with for the next several years on either 1080p or 1440p. You don't really need to spend more than this. However, we should talk about what if you are in a higher performance class and you have the budget to go for it, what would be worth spending more money for? Well, I did also currently see the RX 9070 from AMD finally discounted below its MSRP to $510. It's been available at its MSRP of $550 for a while now. And this is also a 16 gigabyte graphics card, and it is noticeably faster than the 9060 XT and 5060 Ti 16 gigabytes. So this is definitely an interesting option. I'm seeing this available from Walmart. Now, what's got NVIDIA have to compete with this? Well, they have the RTX 5070. Now, here's the thing. Over like Black Friday and leading up to Black Friday, I had seen RTX 5070s dip well below $500. And so if you could get a 5070 for noticeably less money than a 9070, I think it could make sense to do that. Although it's a 12 gigabyte card, so that's something to think about. Now, currently though, if I'm buying today, the lowest price I can find for a 5070 is $520. Now, to be clear, that's still below its original MSRP of $550. But, you know, if we're looking at it against this 9070, this means that you're spending $10 more for less VRAM at 12. But also, in my head-to-head comparisons, I have the 9070 averaging 16% faster out of all of my tests. However, that was at that was when you're kind of maxing things out. For the most part, I did some medium testing as well, though. I did look at some upscaling, and there were some outliers here where you're going beyond that 12 gigabytes of VRAM. If you remove those outliers, or in other words, if you just realize there are specific games where you will have to play at something other than maximum settings, then the 9070 is averaging 10% faster. If we remove those outliers, which again, corresponding to real world use, that just means there are situations where you would have to rein in the graphics settings slightly to make sure you're within the 12 gigabyte VRAM buffer. It's not common. As time goes on, it will probably become more common. So, there's that. So essentially these cost about the same, but the difference between this matchup and our $370 matchup with the 5060 Ti 9060 XT 16 gigabyte is that in this case, AMD is offering more performance, 10 to 15%, depending on, exactly what games and settings you're looking at, and is offering more VRAM. Whereas that wasn't the case at that other price class, right? Also, AMD is coming in $10 less here, although I wouldn't make much out of that, right? It's basically the same price when you're talking $500, right? So at this point, really, you've just got to ask yourself, are you going to go with the NVIDIA feature set advantage, right? Are you willing to spend basically to lose out on VRAM and a little bit of raw performance, not massive amounts, to get the extra VRAM from AMD? Now you're in the AMD ecosystem. So I will say that there are some games where you'll be relying on Optiscaler to get FSR 4 into games that don't have FSR 4 support out of the box. And like in online games, you're not going to do that because modding game files can get you banned. So there's a few annoyances with going this route. But I would say that in general, I think going with the 9070 here is a pretty solid option. I would lean this direction, but I am going to mention that I don't think the 5070 at this price is a bad decision. Just, be aware you are taking some compromises to get that NVIDIA ecosystem going. Both of these, honestly, I think the vast majority of people on a 1440p or 1080p display are going to actually be very happy with both of these cards, and they're costing about the same. There's pros and cons, raw performance-wise and VRAM-wise, the 9070 definitely wins. So at this point, you got to ask yourself, what if we spend even more money? Is it worth doing that? So what is there beyond this point? So beyond this point, from AMD, you have the 9070 XT. The lowest prices I can currently find is $600, which is its MSRP, and it's nice to see that it's come down to that price. That being said, though, if you can find the 9070 non-XT version at $510 right now, we're looking at $600 versus $510. You're spending 18% more money, and it is not 18% faster. The 9070 XT has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, just like the 9070 non-XT, and they're really closer to a 10% performance differential. So here you're spending 18% more money to get 10% more performance and absolutely no additional features. So from a value perspective, I don't think I can recommend the 9070 XT at these current prices. Again, when you're watching this video, it's possible that prices are fluctuating. You also might be watching in other regions where you'll have to, find the lowest prices available in your region and do some of these same types of calculations, which is why I'm talking about like what percent faster one GPU is over another. So you can start to look at some of these calculations again as prices change. And I do one of these videos every month, so you can, keep checking in as I update things based on current pricing. But at current pricing, I don't think it makes sense to spend almost $100 more on the XT version of the 9070 when the non-XT version, really, if you turn off a frame rate counter and use the two GPUs, they're very, very similar. You might be able to tell the 10% performance difference, but it's not much, and it's almost $100 more here. I'm not sold on that. That's another reason why, as we get into the NVIDIA side of things, their next step up is the 5070 Ti. That's at $750, which is its MSRP. I had briefly seen a few models drop to like $720, $730 around Black Friday, so not any major discounts. Now, the one thing the 5070 Ti has going for it is if you do want to be in the NVIDIA side of things, you're just like, okay, I get it, the 9070 XT, they're good GPUs, but I just want to buy NVIDIA. If you're being honest with yourself and that's the situation, what the 5070 Ti has going for it is it gets you to 16 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, there's the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte, but the 5070 Ti is massively more powerful than that. It is in a different class. The 5070 Ti is going to do well on a 4K display. You'd be using DLSS 4, but DLSS 4 looks really good with a 4K output. So even using it in its performance mode looks pretty solid. And I'm not even talking about frame generator. I'm just talking about the upscaling. If you want to use frame gen on top of that, cool. That's up to you. The point is that if you're going the NVIDIA route and you want a 4K capable GPU, the 5070 Ti is a good choice for that. You've got your 16 gigabytes of VRAM instead of the 12 on the 5070. And again, the additional performance here is making it more 4K capable. Now, as far as what's offering better value, the 9070 from AMD, which is currently $510, is slower than a 5070 Ti, but not dramatically so. So, do keep that in mind when we're looking at spending, $750 versus $510. So you're spending 47% more money. So it's basically a 50% price increase for significantly less than a 50% performance increase. So that's something to think about. But the 5070 Ti is overall faster. You do get the DLSS side of things and all that. And I will say that the 5070 Ti is capable of path tracing, whereas the 9070 is going to struggle with path tracing. So if you're interested in those kind of single-player games with path tracing features and things like that, this is another one that gets you there. And the 5070 non-Ti, which costs a lot less, can struggle with path tracing from a VRAM perspective with only 12, and from a raw performance perspective. It's a little more borderline. You can use path tracing on a 5070, but it's not like an amazing experience, whereas the 5070 Ti, especially on a 1440p display, is a lot more at home. So you're spending a lot of money to get this NVIDIA route, but you are getting something for this step up. So there's that. Now, past this point, though, the 5080, I'm currently seeing it up to $1,100 again and up, which, for a while there, I'd seen it back down to its MSRP of $999, in which case it's still only about 15% faster than the 5070 Ti, where even at MSRP, I think the 5070 Ti makes more sense than the 5080 from a value perspective. And as this is starting to go up over its MSRP again, I think the 5080 is back into the I mean, if you've put together the rest of your build, you've already got the fastest CPU, you've already got good RAM, which right now is really expensive. Like, then you could consider spending that additional money on the 5080, but it's not good value over the 5070 Ti, which is already not good value over the 9070, right? So the point is, you're really getting into diminishing returns here. But so make sure you've maxed out all the other relevant performance pieces of your gaming PC build before you go ahead and buy that. And if you think you hear kids jumping around in the background, it's because they came on down here. So we'll wrap up the video here in a second so I can see what they're looking for. Now, the 5090 is the only step up we can go to from here. They're like $3,000. They're also really, really good at 4K gaming. Yeah. Anyway, basically, if you just want to buy the most powerful GPU out there, you could buy yourself a 5090. It is noticeably more powerful than a 5080 and a 5070 Ti and all of that, but you know, it's a lot of money. But if for you can afford it and you're just wondering, like, do I get anything for it? It gets diminishing returns from like a FPS per dollar standpoint, but you certainly get to a different class of performance. So I think if you're looking for really high performance 4K gaming without a lot of visual sacrifices other than upscaling, you can leave everything else at maximum settings. Just maybe use DLSS on those games that really push ray tracing features, etc. It's good at that. All right, so yeah, basically to round out the recommendations, if you're buying around the $200 price point, the 5050s actually kind of makes sense now that it's hit that price point. For everybody else, as long as you can get it around $370, I think the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte is kind of the mainstream choice for most people. If you have additional budget, I think the 9070 makes a lot of sense at $510, and I could respect somebody choosing the 5070 instead if you're not too worried about the 12 gigabyte VRAM situation. So again, I'm gonna say that's more of a personal preference split here. I might lean the 9070 route myself, but I can respect this choice if you just weigh those pros and cons yourself. Past this point is diminishing returns. 5070 Ti if you're going the NVIDIA route and want to push into 4K stuff and or 1440p path tracing. Beyond that, you're really throwing money away on the 5080, and the 5090 only makes sense to a particular income class of buyer, in which case, yeah, the 5090 is really good. Just you're paying through the nose for it. Don't go into massive debt for that, all of that. That's my recommendations for December. Like I said, do one of these every month as pricing changes. Hope all of you have an excellent day.